Rey and Kylo have the most boring, predictable, white bread, vanilla, unoriginal, and just dull relationship in the entire sequel trilogy of Star Wars.
We both know that I have to kill you now.
To the point that I have to wonder, why did anyone try to claim this was a dark, forbidden romance for the ages, instead of the narrative equivalent of thinking mayonnaise is spicy? It's kind of like the argument that Rian Johnson made Star Wars great again, and
Very poor choice of words.
I wouldn't use that wording. Actually, no, that's on point for the film. Because The Last Jedi was such an out there and weird movie. And yeah, doing donuts in your Honda Civic till you lose 2 of the wheels and then throwing the keys to the Jewish guy and telling him good luck driving home is weird. But I wouldn't say that's a mark of quality or even good. Kinda just being a dick. And that broken down Honda Civic is kind of like Reylo. Narratively, it never had much of a leg to stand on, especially after the first movie, but the argument always persisted over logic, reason, sense, Nebraska, Wendigos, the bus driver, and somehow the clown FBI agent, not Frank, the actual clown FBI agent that snuck under my bed. And mostly all this is looked over because of the trope enemies to lovers, concept over context, and you know, even if you look past every ounce of context as to why Rey and Kylo couldn't and shouldn't be together, give me your attention, baby. They're really just boring. As narrative archetypes, they are presented as the Luke Invader of the sequel trilogy, only without the sauce, and even then, Rey and Kylo do not complement each other on almost any level as the films present themselves. For one of them to even end up with each other, as enemies to lovers have to do, there has to be some type of conflict that prevents one or both parties from switching sides, as you see most of the time in enemies to lovers stories. For example, in Game of Thrones, there is Brienne of Tarth and Jaime Lannister, introduced as enemies due to circumstances, yet neither has ever contributed to any personal offense that has gone beyond the circumstance. Jaime wants to get back to his sister, who he has a toxic love affair and children with.
Brother,
Who are at war with everyone, especially the Starks. Brienne is still mourning her dead gay king and is sworn to serve the Starks, who have beef with the Lannisters for killing Sean Bean. As time goes on, we see Jaime and Brienne reluctantly help each other against their own instincts. The story understands that before these two can go from enemies to pining lovers, there needs to be a journey of them becoming allies, comrades, respecting each other, friends, and finally caring about the other more than a friend, but not being able to cross that boundary due to where they stand in the world and as characters. The conflict of why these two characters can't get together is woven so deeply into the personal arcs of the characters and the world that surrounds them. For either to be with the other, they have to let go of who they are, but to do that would completely change who they are as characters fundamentally. Where this is different is that for Brienne to go to Jaime, it would be the death of her character, trading her morals, duty, and personal goals to be with him, which would erase things that he grew to love about her while also enabling the toxicity of his life, something that she, and internally he, hates. Yes, if you want for Brienne to be Jaime's lover, you can just force them together and have her give up everything, including what he loves about her, to be with him. But it's character assassination. No longer are you working within the boundaries of the world or the characters, and if you're trying to make this official, it just wouldn't work. Whereas if Jaime goes to Brienne, it is him growing as a person, letting go of that toxic life that he brought upon himself to be with someone that sees the good qualities within him, the good qualities that exist with or without Brienne. This would be growth for the character, something he and Brienne both want.
I made a promise.
Our child will rule Westeros.
Our child will never be born if the dead come south. When the fighting in the north is over, someone wins. You understand that, don't you? If the dead win, they march south and kill us all. If the living win, and we've betrayed them, they march south and kill us all.
There is a reason why in Game of Thrones Season 8, almost universally known as the worst season of Game of Thrones, it is initially praised to see Jaime finally abandon the toxicity of his life and go to Brienne of Tarth. This is a character arc that has been building the entire series of the show even before he met Brienne. It's why when he leaves Brienne, when he goes back To be with Cersei, it is deemed character assassination, because not only is he leaving the woman that he grew to love, he is leaving the goodness he grew to be. He is saying things that contradict to what he was as a character, because him ending up with Brienne isn't just about enemies to lovers, it's based on who he is as a character. Within the story of Game of Thrones and the personal character arcs of Jaime and Brienne, the enemies to lovers journey for them is incredibly interesting and ever evolving, as they do as characters, based entirely on who they are as people and where they fit into the world. Not only that, but even on a physical level, Jaime and Brienne are an interesting pair. Brienne is a knight. She's bigger than your average woman. She's a big bitch. I love Gwendolyn Christie. That is not an insult. I say bitch very affectionately. Jaime, you're also a pretty bitch. I say that very insultingly. Jaime looks like a male model. He is one of the best fighters in the kingdom. He is regarded as one of the most eligible bachelors in the kingdom, till he loses his hand, which makes him even more different than Brienne, who is one of the best fighters in the kingdom, but she doesn't treat him differently because he lost his hand. This is also another factor of the enemies to lovers situation. These two characters have a love for each other that transcends what the other has to offer. Brienne doesn't love Jaime because of what he can give her. She loves him because of who he is as a man, his honor that he tries to hide. And Jaime loves Brienne not because she is a beautiful goddess, cause Gwendolyn Christie. Oh boy. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, because he, fuck me. I have to re-record this. Gwendolyn Christie just messed up my train of thought. What makes the relationship work, what makes them have some form of foundation, is that despite everything different about them, what makes them connect, makes them want each other, is the fact that they are both good people on the inside. No matter if it's for better or worse, if you want your enemies and lovers to work, there needs to be more there than just aesthetic. Because when all you have is an aesthetic and only aesthetic, you have nothing. Boring, nothing to gain, nothing to lose, nothing to change, only for fools. I've heard the argument time and time and again that Reylo is this dark fantasy, the ultimate erotic villain fucker dream, but
you are not serious figures.
one half of the argument is for Kylo to turn good, which negates the darkness and villain fucking aspects of the concept, saying that he's just a sweet misunderstood boy, a real victim, and he's not actually that bad. And what is the point of being a villain fucker if you don't want to fuck a villain? I'm just saying. On top of that, Kylo has never displayed any good within him within the films themselves, except for when he is forced to be redeemed at the end. Before that, he's just an evil fucker. Even his actor Adam Driver went on record to say that Kylo was willingly choosing the dark path and had no regrets or anything to be redeemed from in his eyes. And well, that's the actor. He knew the story from the start.
You heard the fan rumblings about Bendemption, that Kylo Ren is going to be redeemed back to his Ben Solo-like heart.
What does he need to be redeemed for?
Oh! Spoken like a true villain.
I feel like he feels like he's in the right, so what is there to be redeemed from?
Know that at least you're playing Vader 2.0? Like, at least did you know that as conceptually?
I did, yeah. And I had an overall arc that in mind that he wanted to do, which, you know, then changed. But his idea was that almost the opposite journey of Vader, where Vader starts the most confident, the most, committed to the dark side, and by, the last movie, he's the most vulnerable and weak, and he wanted to start at the opposite, where this character was the most confused and vulnerable, and by the end of the three movies would be most committed to the dark side. So I tried to keep that arc in mind, regardless if that wound up not being the journey anyway, because it changed, obviously, as we were shooting.
Yeah, right.
Right, but I was still kind of focused on that.
When did it change?
Well, with Ryan, he took it into a different direction.
You're such fucking dopes.
Still, it kind of still tracked with the character. Then the last one, it changed into being, about them and the dyad and things like that.
And then again, so you
and kind of evolving into Ben Solo. That was never part of it.
That wasn't either?
No.
Oh, I know. You can point to some third-party material and say otherwise, but since that's just official fan fiction, none of that matters, nor does it impact the films, because the films don't care about that. Not even the film that apparently was looked over by the story group heads and tell, your continuity sucks. On Rey's side, for the concept to work, it means she would have to go dark for whatever reason, but despite a few anger issues in universe, Rey has never done anything pragmatic, always choosing to be good and virtuous, and the stories in question portray her as objectively right in her her resolve. And let's say you did want to make her go dark. The only time Rey has come close to stabby stab is when it came to people she cared about being hurt. The first time was because Kylo almost killed Finn, and the second time was because Kylo kept trying to kill her. So, you know, the only pushes to the dark side she has had has never been a temptation to be evil and dark, but to kill the people who keep fucking with her, and Kylo happens to be one of the people who keeps fucking with her day, and not in the way shippers like. For this relationship to be interesting, you have to turn the story into fan fiction, you have to turn the characters into completely different people. It's probably why fan interpretation and self-projection run so rampant in regards to people who want Rey and Kylo to be together, because who they are officially just doesn't work, and there's not really much to grow from there. And jokes aside, there is nothing wrong with shipping to ship everyone from FedEx to UPS ships, but when the conversation bleeds into what is the most interesting, erotic, or just downright darkly fucked up thing a story could officially do, that's not Rey though, because Rey and Kylo are boring together. And a large part of that is because for these two characters to be together, whatever makes them interesting will be lost in order to make it happen. The Force Awakens, for all its faults, introduced lots of interesting things about their characters. What made Rey so interesting wasn't just the ability for people to self-project their own life onto her, but what we did see of her as a character. Rey was immature, quick to anger, but deeply loyal to the people she grew close to, the people she grew to care about, the people she grew to love. Rey does this with BB-8. She sees herself in the little droid, the isolation, the desperation, the desire to get off this world and find your people, find where you belong. She does this with Finn, who she grows so close to that when Kylo almost kills him, Rey almost kills Kylo, and when it looks like Finn is going to die in Starkiller Base, Rey lays down next to him to die with him. What Rey lacked in any objective ideology or concrete trials to overcome, she made up for with a defined personality of what she did and didn't care for. We may not have known what she thought of the politics of the wider galaxy, but we knew if anyone hurt the people she cared about, there would be blood. Kylo, on the other hand, had to overcome the biggest trial any Darksider could by killing his father and rejecting redemption, rejecting the light. We may not know exactly what turned Kylo into who he was, but we knew that no matter what, he was committed to the cause. He went past the point of no return. This is what Adam Driver himself said. This is what J.J. Abrams said. None of these aspects of Rey and Kylo's character really left any room for something to grow of interest beyond the bare minimum concept of he's a Darksider and she's a Lightsider. Officially, that is. If you would want something to grow from this relationship officially, you would have to reveal some little hidden secret about their past, as Rey and Kylo being related, or Rey being one of the students from Luke's school, but even then, you're just relating to a past that has little to do with the present, but at least it gives some context better than no context. The Last Jedi tries so hard to make it seem like a forbidden thing, but when all Rey has to her character is the fact that she would want to kill Kylo as he is a threat to what she cares about, and has Rey made her shitless for almost taking away the only thing she cares in the galaxy and taking already away something she cared about in the galaxy, and Kylo has proven that his goals are more important to him than even his father who raised him, who loved him, yet he killed him in cold blood, rejecting light, rejecting redemption, rejecting family and love. The only thing you can do by forcing these two characters together for the sake of the concept of them working together is making them both far less interesting and more boring, because you have to sacrifice these interesting things about their character. What made Rey so interesting back when she came out in 2015 is that this wasn't a character defined by chasing some moody bad boy like it was on some Twilight shit. This was a character who would literally beat the brakes off a neo-Nazi allegory character if he went after what she cared about. Yes, Kylo Ren is an allegory for space Nazis. The director was Jewish and even said that, kick rocks, bitches. And what made Kylo so interesting in The Force Awakens is that this was a character who rejected the love of his family, rejected redemption. He chose to be Kylo Ren, reject his given name for a chosen one. And yeah, I know you're gonna say, but Okiro, in The Last Jedi, he rejected redemption again. Only, you know, in The Force Awakens, when it's this big emotional moment with the father who raised him and loved him, it's with this girl he has no relationship with. But since, you know, we want them to fuck, we self-project a relationship that was never even there. And therein lies the problem with Rey and Kylo's relationship. There is nothing, there is no history, there is no dynamic. The only justification anyone seems to ever come up with is by using other characters or context to support Rey and Kylo. But Rey and Kylo are not Anakin and Padme. Rey and Kylo are not Luke and Vader. They're not even Anakin and Obi-Wan. And again, we're talking about this from a canon official perspective. perspective, not the fandom one. Fandom you can do whatever you want with, and the fandom Jabba the Hutt is butt fucking General Grievous, and I wish I was joking. But back on the official material, there is something to be said. If in order to make any concept work based on any official story, you have to disregard that official story as much as possible. The one unique thing about Rey and Kylo's white bread, stale, great value dynamic is that it is almost a paradox with how broken and boring it is. There was such a forced attempt at making these two characters into some epic, star-crossed forbidden team-up that not only would and didn't work as the lovers from the enemies to lovers trope for all the reasons mentioned above, they don't even work by the end of the trilogy as the enemies of the enemies to lovers trope. The Last Jedi is the gift that keeps on giving in terms of story fuck-ups, because it ignored the step of Rey and Kylo's enemy relationship by forgetting all of Rey's personal agency for the sake of turning her into a passive protagonist that just follows around any man in the film, and trivializing Kylo's sacrificing for the sake of repeating a will he won't they redemption turn subplot. By the time we get to the Rise of Skywalker, there is no more suspense at what's going to happen. There are no more questions. There's no more time. Kylo has nothing to challenge Rey with. Physically, she has beaten him. Ideologically, she has outmaneuvered him. He has nothing to challenge her with. So the two different ways the antagonist functions for a story is left empty and hollow, like their relationship. I am going to get so many death threats after this video is done. I just know it. I usually at least get one death threat a month, and I am missing my quota. It's no wonder almost every version of 9 has to just pull a new dynamic out of its ass because there's nothing else but the great value dynamic we have. And even when the House of Mouse put a gun to JJ's head and made him throw in that empty redemption arc and later a kiss, it doesn't do anything because there's nothing there. You can remove this sweater wearing random fraud and the ending stays the same, except for Rey being brought back to life after dying due to the plot. And this is not me ragging on the concept of enemies to lovers or the redemption arc love. This is me ragging on the concept of Rey and Kylo because they got no enemies to lovers only works if the characters are only enemies by circumstances, not malicious intent or genuine desire to kill the other, which is what they had in The Force Awakens. And if you want the two characters to genuinely hate each other and want each other dead, that's called hate fucking, and a completely different thing. Enemies to lovers requires a long arc of going from enemy to ally to friend to lover. This is why I used Game of Thrones as an example, because as much as that show fucks up its final season, even it understood how to do enemies to lovers. If you're saying that Kylo and Rey are not really enemies and they were always on the same side and the only people who understood each other, well, that's not enemies to lovers, and that really also doesn't work with what's officially shown. And if you're saying that, oh no, they are enemies to lovers, but you know, Rey is actually a secret sadistic person, then again, you're losing your whole aesthetic. The problem from an official standpoint is that the aesthetic of Rey and Kylo, the story of Rey and Kylo, and the forced enemies to lovers that people keep insisting should be just doesn't work together. If you want two characters who function as complete foils to each other on a narrative and thematic level, you have Finn and Kylo, two characters raised to be cogs in the machine of the order that is raised off the ashes of the last one, who reject their given fate for a destiny they chose for themselves. Unless you're working under the assumption that Rey and Kylo are the grandchildren of Anakin, battling it out for his legacy, Finn naturally serves as a better protagonist and all around a better character for the sequel trilogy over Rey in relation to being a foil for Kylo. Though this is also due to Kylo just being a poor antagonist for Rey, to the point that you have to wonder what was even the point of killing Snoke off when he would have been a far better big bad for Rey to overcome than Kylo or Palpatine. Rey beat him in The Force Awakens, and The Last Jedi has her basically beat him again. Palpatine is just an obvious replacement to Snoke, and even in Duel of the Fates, Kylo just becomes Snoke 2.0, which he's built up and powerful and has really no personal goals outside of that. But instead of, killing him with the power of death, Rey kills him with the power of kindness at the last minute, but okay, death equals redemption again, whatever. Even compared to other sequel trilogy ships, Reylo really just gets away with being more boring than eggshell white paint due to the fact that Kylo being a man and Rey being a woman allows the most basic Starbucks drinking, Olive Garden eating vanilla folk to call it erotic, when there's really nothing there in the actual story because we never get past the setup. The sequel trilogy never really goes past the setup thanks to The Last Jedi. And even as a setup, Kylo had more of an organic setup as Finn's enemy than he did as Rey's, which if you want to introduce some sword swallowing into your shipping, be my guest. I'm not going to judge.
A sword swallower through and through.
But in terms of dark, brooding, fucked up relationships, Reylo is nothing new, nothing exotic, and nothing more than the overdone concept based entirely around aesthetic and assigned gender self-projected roles on where men and women fit into Star Wars. It's why Kylo is always compared to Anakin in this dynamic despite them having nothing in common but being men, wearing dark clothes, sharing some DNA but no personality traits that aren't already shared by all Darksiders. And Rey for some reason is always getting compared to Padme, even though they have literally nothing in common beyond their gender. If anything, Rey has more in common with Anakin over here than Kylo does. But hey, it's not like she was supposed to be his granddaughter or anything. Every day I question how you three screwed this up so badly. In terms of foils, Rey and Kylo can't even compare to Finn and Kylo or Hux and Kylo or Rey and Finn. As much as anyone can say they never saw Finn and Rey as interesting because lead heroic guy with lead heroic woman is overdone, which at this point is not really true given how Hollywood is allergic to romance. There's actually a lot of conflict and narrative space for that relationship to grow into something that changes and challenges both characters. But that is a video for another day. In regards to Rey and Kylo, I could go on and on about why their dynamic is the most unseasoned potato salad of relationships, but that would be giving it more time than Disney Lucasfilm even gave it. It's fine to like Rey and Kylo for whatever personal reason you have as a fandom thing. Who really cares about that? I know white couples love to dress up as them because, you know, Caucasian's gonna Caucasian. But for the actual official story to say what should or shouldn't work and what does and doesn't work, blah blah blah, it's nothing more than an empty smokescreen of aesthetics without substance, spice, or especially since the role everyone says Rey should fill as his lover could be filled by any random person, and it would probably make more sense given the fact for it to be Rey, you have to strip her of everything that makes her who she is, and at that point, would it even be Rey? Why not just make an OC for Kylo to bang? Maybe a Knight of Ren, make a Knight of Ren a woman. We don't know what's under those robes. Do we know what's under those robes? Do we even know your names in the film? Why are you guys like this? Or, you know, just let the Kylo shippers have their bratty bottom back.
A sword swallower through and through.
Even if you want to force Reylo to happen in the new Jedi Order film by kidnapping Adam's family so he agrees to go back to the Halloween spirit of a studio that is Disney Lucasfilm, what does bringing back Kylo Ren / Ben Solo do beyond giving Rey a white love interest that doesn't really offer her anything in the universe that she already doesn't have either with Finn or by herself as a person? I mean, it does give Adam Driver thirsters enough to look at Adam Driver again, so I guess that's it. But how do you love the official dynamic between two characters if you have to ignore the very core aspect of what makes those characters who they are officially? That just sounds boring to me. Not in the transformative sense, do whatever you want in the transformative sense, but it sounds boring to me to try to enjoy that official version, and I struggle to name something more boring than Reylo. Erasing criticisms on how it's regressive, problematic, or even rushed and nonsensical, all of which are valid criticisms, you are just left with an uninteresting, unseasoned relationship that challenges nothing, does nothing, and offers nothing new, original, or even interesting. For as many people say it's the best part of the sequel trilogy, I just don't see it. It sounds completely boring. If this is the best, fuck me, you guys have low standards or bad taste. You should maybe get a COVID test. Now, before you tie your bowels in a bunch and spew your hot takes in my comment section,
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care.
Let me tell you something.
We don't care.
I'm not saying you can't like one dynamic more than the other or just want to consume one from a personal perspective. Do whatever you want. That's what fandom is, transformative. Some people like plain oatmeal, then honey butter garlic chicken with a side of waffles, but one just got a little more flavor than the other. I kid, calm down. It's used as a gotcha in The Last Jedi, and even then actually doesn't have either character challenge the other on any level beyond the superficial, vomiting empty platitudes as the writer pretends these characters have this epic history together, but in reality this is literally their second time interacting, an interaction that was forced both characters to ignore who they are as characters because the writer literally lacked the creativity to do anything else with them other than force puzzle pieces together even if the picture breaks. And both The Rise of Skywalker and Duel of the Fates have no idea what to even do with this relationship. It's narratively broken and boring, offering nothing to the story but opposite genders genders, color schemes, and self-projection, yet nothing ideologically, personally, or narratively to make them interesting beyond the very bare minimum character roles filled by a protagonist and an antagonist. One of the only reasons making Rey and Kylo related to each other would have done anything is because it gives them a history that the films just don't give them. Gives them an ideological and personal vendetta that they have to confront. It's probably one of the only reasons why early drafts of The Rise of Skywalker and Duel of the Fates still tried to make them related in some way. And this concept at least would have worked in some regard, especially given Adam was sold to the character of Kylo Ren as the reverse Vader and Rey is the keeper of the Skywalker legacy. Regardless of what you make her, she was always going to be this trilogy Skywalker. So in that regard, at least there you have something for the characters to grow by if you make them related. And for the people who wanted a real dark, fucked up romance to fandom wank about, there's nothing like some Sweet Home Alderaan if that's what you're into. Thank you for making it to the end of this video, and thank you for your views. Thank you to Molly, Steffi, M, Lola, Rhea, Jason, Emily, and the Cloney Boy, as well as all my Patreon and YouTube supporters, my channel manager Chloe, Frank the FBI agent who watches all my internet history, and Chester the Clown under my bed. What's good, bro? And all of you who have commented and shared my video. No matter what time you're watching this, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. I'll see you for the next video.